Hello, welcome back to my channel. I am VA Winter, an indie author retelling history and classic literature, and occasionally perhaps a fairy tale with a speculative twist. And today I'm doing a video which I've been talking about doing for months, which is a video talking about why I've decided to indie publish, because this is a decision I've spent years making. I've sort of distilled this down to 6 reasons, although there are kind of more and they do bleed into each other. It was just a good way to structure the video. So if you've watched some of my videos, you've probably heard me talking about the fact that I've just done a master's degree in creative writing, and I am going to do a video at some point in the next, hopefully, few weeks, talking about how I feel about my experience on the master's degree, what my experience was like, and kind of like trying to give anybody who's trying to decide whether to do one an idea of whether they should or not, of who it's for. But I just want to mention it for the context of this video because it had a huge impact on both my decision and how long it took me to come to that decision. Brief history. I was interested in self-publishing before doing either of my degrees. So I have a master's degree in creative writing and I have an undergraduate degree in English literature and creative writing, which was a 50-50 split. Going into academia made me wonder if self-publishing was the right option. Academic creative writing, in my experience, is heavily connected to traditional publishing as it stands right now and the university I went to. The expectation on both degrees, and more intense on the master's than the undergrad, was that the rest of the students, would write short stories or poetry, submit to literary journals, then write a novel if novels were what you wanted to do, query agents, etc, 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 go that traditional route. During my MA year, I was told explicitly at one point it was supposed to be a lecture on the option of self-publishing. What it was a heavily biased diatribe about how awful self-publishing is and you'll never make any money doing it. It's a waste of time. Your friends and family are the only people who will ever read your books, so don't even bother. That is obviously false. That is obviously not true. It was true when the person giving that lecture was starting their career. So 20, 30, 40 years ago, self-publishing wasn't really a viable option. Before the advent of the Kindle, before Amazon, we may think what we think of Amazon, but they did open up the opportunity for indie publishing through the Kindle platform to become a thing, to become a viable career option. So I spent the last few years paralysed. And I talked about this in my recent vlog, which I'll leave linked up above. It's sort of in the middle, roughly, of it. I knew in my heart, I think, all the way through that I wanted to indie publish, that I wanted to self-publish, that was the path for me, that was the thing that made me excited about writing. But I had all these voices in my head, influenced by what I was consuming on a weekly basis at university, that's a bad idea. That is something to be ashamed of. That is something that you don't want to admit that you want at all, ever. I did let them in and I did let them influence me, which is a shame because, as I said in that vlog, if I'd have stuck to the path I was on before I started university, I probably would have had several books out by now and I would be a lot further on in my career than I currently am. I am here nonetheless at this point in my career, and I didn't get round to querying agents. I submitted one short story to one magazine and got rejected because it was a requirement of my degree, which the person who rejected it said it was a good story, the writing was good, it just wasn't a traditional enough story for them. And that story may never see the light of day for completely unrelated reasons. I finished my MA programme, as I said, in September, but in July and August I took a leap of faith and I signed up for Sarah Cannon's Publish and Thrive self-publishing course. I just felt like I got to this point in July, I was just working on my dissertation, and it was just this growing feeling of I don't want to query agents. I mean, the novel I was writing at the time was a YA dystopian. I don't think, from what I know of the market, I don't think it would have sold anyway. I think it would have been a waste of time. After that rather long intro, here are the 6 main reasons I'm indie publishing. Number 1 is control over my own publishing schedule. And I feel like this is a huge one for most indie authors. So if instead of submitting that short story to that magazine last year, I'd just hit publish, put it on my website for free, put it on Amazon for 99p, the same as I've got my current short story, it would have been out there and people would have been able to read it. Instead, it's sitting on my hard drive in the cloud, I suppose, technically. I don't want to sit and wait forever for a gatekeeper to tell me that my stories or the thing that I've written is the right kind of thing for them, that I finally worked out how to be commercial enough for them, that I'm good enough, in air quotes, Commercial publishing is commercial. It is not about how good you are as a writer. Rejection does not mean you're a bad writer. It doesn't mean that you can't tell a story. It just means that what you've written, for one reason or another, they can't sell. Sometimes it is because your writing isn't high enough quality yet. Sometimes it is a failure of the story and there are issues with it. Sometimes, and for a lot of writers, it's just the fact that there are more writers and stories than there are slots at publishing houses. They pick the ones that they think will make the most money, which means the ones that are the most commercial, the ones that fit the traditional mold the best. It's all about how saleable and how marketable you are, as well as your book. And you could spend your whole life, and this is how I feel, I could spend my whole life chasing trends and trying to write the right thing, the right time, for the right person, for the right market conditions, and it's just exhausting and potentially endless. Or I could write what I want to write right now, do my own quality control, hire editors, get it out to beta readers, do whatever you feel you need to do for your book to make it high enough quality. As an indie author, you can write what you want, publish it when you want, publish how often you want, publish to what platforms you want. It's up to you. If you are a really fast writer, you can publish as quick as you can write. If you want to take a break, you can take a break. You don't have a traditional publisher's release schedule to bear in mind. I don't have to sit on a finished book and not publish it just because it doesn't work for someone else's schedule, just because there's a clash, or there's already another book that is similar to yours coming out this season, so yours is going to have to get pushed back. I can hit publish, do the marketing, and move on to the next project. That for me is a huge selling point. A bit like producing these YouTube videos. I can write it, create it, edit it, get it out there, move on to the next one. Obviously with novels it's going to take longer. I can't do 2 novels a week or even 1 a week, but it's the same principle, it's the same process. It's you work on a project, you complete the project, you publish the project for other people to consume, you move on to the next project. You improve as you go along as well. So the second reason is royalties. Now, royalties is a little bit of a complicated one because royalties are higher for self-published authors. I mean, if you get a traditional deal, you're looking at about 10%, give or take, depending on whether you're paperback, hardback, the specific deal you get, etc. And then, of course, you've got your agent's fees to come out of your royalty as well. Whereas, obviously, you publish a book on Amazon between $2.99 and $9.99 anyway, and most of the platforms you can publish a book at any price and you will get 70% royalty. That's a huge difference. That's a 60% difference, roughly speaking. But indie authors have upfront costs, so you've got to pay for the cover, you've got to pay for the editing, any marketing you want to do, all these other things that as an indie you have to pay for, whereas a trad pub author doesn't. A traditional published author would get an advance, which is an advance on those royalties. So until your book has earned back that amount in its royalties, you don't get another penny. If you self-publish a book and it costs you £500 to self-publish, obviously for a start, those royalties that you earn are kind of paying yourself back. But it's still your money. It's still your money coming into your bank account. It's 70% of that list price. Whereas with a traditional publisher, you might get your few £1,000 advance, which for a debut author, you're looking at 4 figures, very low 5 figures. You're very lucky to get 5 figures as a debut author. And the more non-traditional of a writer you are, as was seen with the hashtag publishing paid me thing for ethnic minority writers, you get less than if you're a very saleable, attractive, female, male, white, middle-class author. You do get a higher royalty being self-published, but you take on the cost rather than the cost and the risk rather than the publisher, but you don't get an advance. In the long run, the way I kind of view it in my head is a self-published author, if you make the kind of sales where your career would be a success, which is the same principle with a traditional published author, you can fail, you're going to make more money because your book is going to sit on Amazon for the rest of your life if you leave it there. And it might not take off straight away. As time progresses, you will earn back however much you spent, provided you haven't spent a fortune on it, and then some. Which brings me to my next point. Failure. You can only fail at indie publishing if you quit. You might never earn a living. You might never earn what you determine is a living. If you've got a full-time job and a mortgage and kids, your definition of earning a living is going to be higher than, say, mine, single, no kids, and I'm lucky that I have a low cost of living. Unless you do something wrong, unless you break terms of service, unless you break the law, do something major, and even then, they can't really stop you. There is nobody that is going to say, right, I'm sorry, but you haven't sold enough books, so we're not going to give you another book deal. You're not going to be able to publish anymore. There is no one to say that. Even if Amazon kicks you off Amazon, you can sell on your website. It's going to be harder, but you can sell on your website. There are other vendors that you can sell through. Whereas if you go traditional, that publisher picks your book up, you're lucky, you get a book deal, you get an advance, might be a small advance, might be a bigger advance. There are pros and cons, believe it or not, to bigger and smaller advances. And the bigger the advance is, the harder it then is to sell enough books to justify the cost that that publisher has invested in you. So if you get a £10,000 advance, your book needs to earn that back, or at least needs to come close to earning that back. There are all sorts of complicated, and I have seen some of the sort of calculations, the profit and loss sheets that publishers use to determine how many sales your book needs to make in order to justify your cost. And it's going to be different based on all sorts of variables. But if you don't sell enough books, if your sales aren't high enough, aren't to where that publisher determined they needed to be, they're not going to offer you another book deal. And if you've got low sales, you're going to struggle to get another book deal with anybody because you've now got a poor track record. Your name is tainted with that poor track record. And I have spoken to authors this has happened to. It's possible to make a comeback, to start a new pen name essentially and try again. It's possible, but it's hard. Whereas with indie, your book probably won't sell a lot. That's how most indies work. There are unicorns who do it, but most of us, you're going to see low sales on your first book, your second book, your third, your fourth, maybe your fifth. But at some point, if you are persistent enough and your writing is good, the stories are good, and your marketing is right, the chances are it will go like this. And those low sales, no one is going to know about those except you. Readers aren't going to look at your page and go, oh, this book has low sales, I'm not going to buy it. You fail if you quit. That for me was the deciding factor. The fourth one is kind of tied into the first, and that is creative control. And you will notice a lot of these come back down to control. I want creative control over my entire book. The cover, the title, the story, the marketing. With traditional, you don't really control any of that. I mean, the marketing you are expected to do anyway, or you can't control whether that publisher puts any effort behind getting you into bookstores, behind getting you into festivals and getting you signings, getting you publicity. Whereas with indie, those things don't matter quite as much as with traditional. And if you do want those things, it's within your control to go and get them. I want to write about my weird characters. I want to write my retellings. I want to write about characters from marginalised backgrounds similar to my own, about council estates and about poor kids, and retell bits of history that get overlooked because they're about poor people rather than kings, queens and the upper classes. I don't want to be told that my books are too niche. I also don't want telling that my genre is dead, as I mentioned earlier with that YA dystopia. I could publish that tomorrow and it could sell really, really well. I don't know. Might not. Might. Who is a publisher to decide that? There are things that have a lower market share. Some of the things I want to write about will never be as popular as Pretty White Girl Falls in Love with a Vampire. Books without a romance will never be as popular as books about romance. But the point is that you should be able to tell the stories you want to tell with a realistic expectation of how well they're likely to do. And you've got to bear in mind the market. The market is what the market is. The readership is what it is. But I can still publish those books. And the few people who will read them and perhaps feel valued by seeing themselves represented in literature in a way that it just isn't in mainstream, I think that's worth it. I just wish I'd have been able, when I was a child, a young teenager, to have been able to pick up a book and see myself reflected, see my struggles reflected, my issues in life reflected, instead of picking up books, and I mean watching TV as well, but that's a whole other problem, and seeing lives that I couldn't relate to, because why does their life look like this and mine look like this? And not understanding that gap. We all have different experiences in life, and the same as an ethnic minority person deserves to see themselves reflected in the books that they're reading, so do kids who are growing up poor. So do kids who are growing up in families that are less than ideal. We all deserve to see ourselves represented and feel like we can relate to the characters that we're reading about in their lives. That's my point. And I don't want to be told by a publisher, oh, you can't do that because there isn't a large enough readership. People don't want to hear about things like that. Because publishing is very middle class and very upper class. If I can find some articles about that, I will link them below because it's a whole other discussion, really. The fifth reason is very similar. Control over signings, conferences, etc. I'm an introvert. I'm not a huge fan of people, like in the sense that I don't do well in crowded spaces with a lot of people and a lot of noise, and in situations where I'm expected to communicate and hold actual conversations with actual people. So I don't want a publisher telling me, well, you're going to have to go to this conference and you're going to have to speak on this panel and you're going to have to stand up in front of hundreds of people and talk, and you're going to have to do signings and you're going to have to sit there at a table and try and sell your books. I don't know how true it is. I was told at one point that You know, if you're going to have a successful publishing career, if your publisher tells you you've got to go and do a book signing, you go and do a book signing. If your publisher tells you you have to fly halfway across the world to do an event, you do it. How true that is, I don't know, but I don't want to risk it. I want control over that. If I choose to do that at some point in my career, great for me, but I don't want to feel pressured to do it, and I don't want to have to justify to anybody why I don't want to do it, because we should all have those choices in life. And with indie, I can make these videos and talk to you like this. I can interact with my readers online in a way that I feel comfortable interacting. And the sixth reason is really just comes down to my own personal values. And this is, at the end of the day, the crux of it. It's kind of the centre upon which everything else rests. I value independence and freedom and creativity. I value small businesses, and I value the idea of supporting people who are making a living freelancing, working independently, artists, editors, other professional services I may need as a writer. I don't like big corporations. I don't like the control they exert over markets, over people, the way they exploit people. You've got the argument of, well, you know, 30% of your royalty will be going to Amazon. Yeah, well, if I traditionally published, my royalty would still be going to Amazon, because my books would still be listed on Amazon. A portion of the sale would go to Amazon anyway, so I'm just kind of cutting the middleman out. And I mean, when you look at the conditions, again, there's one or two articles I've read recently about the working conditions of editors and assistants and people who work at these traditional publishers and the way they're being treated. Most authors, again, I'll leave a link down below, don't even earn a livable wage. Without the author, there's no business. So I like to support small businesses. This is a good way of doing it. This is the most ethical version of capitalism, I think, that can exist. And I want to live by my values, and this is as close as I can get, as far as I can see. Those are my 6 reasons why I'm indie publishing. There are nuanced arguments and conversations, and indie publishing isn't for everybody. And I'm not trying to bash traditional publishing, because I think for some people it's the right choice, for some books it's the right choice. I'm not saying that I will never traditionally publish anything. There may come a point in my career where I have a book that I decide would do well with an agent, where I decide would do well with a traditional publisher. Traditional publishing may change. As indies become more prominent, as people read more indies are now getting talked about on social media, whereas they didn't used to be. It used to be very trad heavy. Things will change. Anything can change. And I think if you want to traditionally publish and you have your reasons for that, that's good. But whatever path you choose, know why you're choosing it. But yeah, so if you have any thoughts on this topic, just don't be mean. Leave them down below. And I will leave you with saying, support indie authors where you can, where you feel you want to. Support small businesses where you can and where you want to. Hit like if you like, subscribe if you want to, and I will see you next time with another video.